Well, thank you, Angela, and welcome everybody. My name is Heath Knockian, and Vice President of Government and Capital Engagement over at the Science Center. It is with great pleasure that Tara Schwartz has agreed to come and sort of participate in this fireside chat to talk about ARPA H as an emergent initiative for the National Institute of Health. I'm not going to try and describe it on her behalf because I will do a horrible job. It should do way better than I will. But that said, I did want to make sure I'm clear to everybody on the call. So this is intended to be a conversation. We're really looking for feedback, insights, questions from y'all rather than broadcasting a bunch of information. So please use the chat. If things come up or you just have a question or a what if or something like that, or how might this impact me, great. If you have ideas that you want to share, awesome, even better. This is intended to be an informational session both ways. So just wanted to tee that up to begin with. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Tara. Thank you again for joining us and making the time.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me and thanks for the invitation. Just for brief background, if you can tell from my background here, I currently work at the National Institutes of Health. I'm the acting principal deputy director, and for most of actually 2021, I was actually on detail down to the Office of Science and Technology Policy at the White House, and my main kind of focus and area that I concentrated most of my efforts on while I was down there was helping to think through how we might set up and propose and kind of just overall establish the entity that is called ARPA H, which is Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health. Now, I think when we're thinking about it, we take a step back and think about all of the amazing things that science has done over the last few decades. Heck, even the last 2 years since we've been in the pandemic, we really stand at this unprecedented moment of progress that makes us ask, what more can we do? And what more can we do to help speed and revolutionize, transform medicine to help improve the health of all Americans? And that's really where ARPA H comes in. We have this really incredible biomedical ecosystem in the US, kind of two major components, although I know this is a gross oversimplification, but we have the sort of important fundamental research that is largely supported by the National Institutes of Health. That's made really great progress in uncovering the underlying mechanisms of health and disease. And then there's also this vibrant and robust biopharmaceutical industry that's created products for patients in a multitude of disease areas. And we've seen a little bit over the last 2 years just how amazing the progress can be when these two entities really work together in a coordinated fashion. But we recognize that there are some important gaps for a variety of different reasons, and that there's an area in that space that ARPA H could help fill. And if you're thinking about kind of the potential opportunity for scientific innovation that ARPA H could plug in, we always like to give a few examples. And one of them is, if we could make mRNA vaccines against the 50 most common mutations that drive cancers to help teach our bodies how to eliminate, cancer cells before they even come together to create a tumor. Or what if we could develop molecular zip codes that were delivered drugs into specific cell types where they're needed, even across the blood-brain barrier, and avoid any side effects in other cells. And of course, these are just a couple examples of the capabilities that an ARPA H could develop. And I'm sure you all are sitting there thinking of a million other really amazing, really ambitious ideas. And I want to continue to stimulate those and promote those. But how we're thinking about ARPA H is that advancing these kinds of ideas is going to require a novel approach to supporting biomedical and health research. And what we're proposing to leverage here is one that's been applied to other areas of research and development, in particular at DARPA, the legendary agency that invented minor things such as the internet and GPS, to name a few. But ARPA H is planning to use this ARPA model. And with ARPA H, our goal is to really create a new kind of entity with in the National Institutes of Health with a new culture that will have autonomy, independence, resources, and authorities to tackle some of these big challenges facing human health. In particular, it's going to support transformative, high risk, high reward biomedical and health research to really drive disruptive solutions across many different disease areas. So it will focus on rapidly creating new technologies, platforms, and capabilities, things that are broadly applicable across a range of diseases and conditions, and work at levels ranging from the molecular up to the societal. And then focus on converting use-driven ideas. So those ideas with a direct application and translating those into solutions for patients quicker than ever before. And we know in order to do this and to do this right, we're going to need to build partnerships, including partnerships, across the federal government, but also with the private sector. And we know also that this ARPA model works, and it has a lot of potential to unlock extraordinary innovation in health. So really excited about seeing this move forward and to discussing it more here today.
Well, thank you, Tara. And so we can either end the conversation now, but really we're hoping we get some questions from the audience. I have my own questions, of course, but if anybody wants us to sort of tee it up and, open this up for questions, commentary, what have you, based on what Tara set up, please do so. I will pause for a moment of awkward silence to let somebody feel uncomfortable, but if somebody would like to be the first sacrificial person to ask a question, great. Michael, thank you, sir. Did you want to pipe up and unmute, or you want to go ahead and you can ask yourself?
Sure,
I can tee it up for you.
Camera. I'm just curious as to what the funding status is. My understanding is it didn't make the cut in budgeting, but I've heard that it's going to be part of the Cures bill. Is that Cures 2.0 bill? Is that accurate?
So let me just, I'll take a step back and talk about the wide swath of congressional activity that has been ongoing with ARPA H over the last several months. So there's always two things, right? We think about, especially when establishing a new organization and a new agency, that's appropriations, so the money, and then the authorizing language, the authorities needed to make it function, really. And so with the appropriations, ARPA H was actually included in both the House and Senate draft fiscal year 2022 budgets. And so I think on the House side, it was a request of $3 billion, and on the Senate side, it was $2.4 billion that were being marked for ARPA H. Now, these are both draft language. We don't have an FY22 budget yet, so it's great news that in an actually bipartisan fashion, that both the House and the Senate included multiple $1 billion for ARPA H for this fiscal year. So we'll see how that plays out. For the authorizing side, and this gets to your question about cures, there have been two authorizing bills that have been introduced for ARPA H. The first, back in I think October, Representative Eshoo introduced a standalone bill for ARPA H. And then the second bill that included authorizing language for ARPA H was Cures 2.0 that Representatives Upton and Gett put forward back in November, I believe. So the great news is that there are draft bills that have been introduced on both the appropriation side and the authorizing side for ARPA H.
Michael, did that answer your question as much as possible?
Yeah, I don't have.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe just a follow up, not knowing when those bills might pass. Once they do, being optimistic, what's the kind of rough timeline before we could expect to see requests for proposals?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say, if, because it's all dependent on when we get a budget, and coupled to that, if we get the authorizations that are required to really get this up and running. So if we get a budget without the authorities, that makes things a little difficult and could impact our timing. But, you know, let's just be optimally optimistic and say that, you know, sometime in February, if we get a budget and we have some authorities to work with, you know, I think our goal is still to get something out and awarded for fiscal year 22. Now, the other thing I would add in terms of the budget that's important to note is that it's multi-year money. So it's 3-year money. So we do have a little bit of leeway to spend that. You know, it's not like we would lose all $2.5–3 billion if we didn't get that money out the door by September.
Okay, thank you, Tara. And I think Michael signals that was a good on that question. So George, you had another question that's sort of talking about DARPA versus ARPA H. George, did you want to sort of provide some color around that?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I forget the alphabet soup with DARPA.
A lot of letters.
But there was like, I believe the term is non-dilutive funding, which even small contractors can apply for, you know, not just big hospitals and universities. I was wondering if something similar would be in ARPA H.
Absolutely. Yep. A very similar approach to DARPA in terms of, you know, the mechanisms used to support the performers, as they call them. And so what we're talking about here is contracts and what's termed in the government as other transaction awards, which give a lot of flexibility to how the awards are made and managed. And then potentially some cooperative agreements. But that's kind of the approach that we intend to take and hope to be able to support a variety of different types of performers, from academics to small businesses to larger businesses.
Yeah, I mean, not just selfishly, but it seems in other tech that a lot of new innovative ideas come out of smaller places, not just the big FAANG corporations or universities.
Yeah, and specific to that, we've also you know, been thinking about how we might want to build an SBIR STTR program within this, so a small business focused effort, in addition to, you know, all the other awards that could potentially be made to small businesses.
Yeah, thank you. That was the alphabet soup I'd forgotten.
Okay. Very good. Thank you, George. Baruch, you had another question about ARPA H focus.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for taking the time. I'm a CEO of a medical device startup, and one of our challenges working with Department of Health and Human Services, especially on research grants, is that although NIH has an SBIR STTR program, a lot of the money is still going, instead of supporting the industry and good commercial ideas, is going to support good science. And I've talked to a lot of companies, and a lot of the SBIR really go for more scientific, interesting ideas than something that can really help patients. And the review process is, it makes sense because the review process is done by scientists, and the commercial side is extremely minimal. So this is one of the more frustrating parts of being a small medical device company in US. One of the places that we are actually having much better experience working was with BARDA, which seems to be much more focused on actually getting solutions into hands of patients. So that is very encouraging. With ARPA H, it sounds like it will be kind of NIH on steroids. So if NIH is looking for something that might one day reach patients, that is supposed to be even more further into the future. Is that what I understand the purpose of ARPA H?
So ARPA H, I would, I don't know if I call it an NIH on steroids, but it is very much hearkening back to this DARPA approach. Now, you mentioned BARDA. BARDA's focus is on medical countermeasures and more towards that late stage of development. So it makes sense, as you mentioned, that there is more of a focus on commercialization there. ARPA H would be similar in many ways to that, but much broader to all of biomedical and health research. So not necessarily limited to, medical countermeasures and sort of health security related issues. The other thing I would just add in terms of kind of how it would work and what its focus would be is that ARPA H right now its focus is slightly undefined, right? We're leaving it intentionally broad. So as I stated, it will focus on things that are from molecular to societal, and then I emphasize use-driven research, and that is because there isn't a director in place because it doesn't exist, and so we want to leave some wiggle room for that director to mold the effort. But in that sort of later stage of commercialization business development sphere, that is something that I do think we want to prioritize at ARPA H. And I think what we're going to see is things coming out that are at variable levels of sort of readiness, if you will. And regardless of those levels, we want all of them from the very beginning to start thinking about, the commercialization plans for it. Even if it's something that they don't, get to a point where it's sort of ready to launch a company out of. But we want them to start thinking about it from the very beginning. And part of that is because of this focus on use-driven research. And if, at the end of the day, we want this to be something that can be utilized by the patients who actually need them. We need to start thinking about that early on in the process of supporting the science and the research that we're going to focus on.
Tara, can I, and Baruch, I'm sorry to cut you off, but maybe I would just want to offer this, a clarifying question, if I may. So what I'm hearing out of this, and this may be useful for, the different participants in this call as we talk through the rest of this conversation, what I'm hearing from you, Tara, is that in its current form, as you're envisioning it, and at least the thinking so far has been there's multiple levels of different types of funding you're anticipating ARPA H to do, from the small business all the way up to these large consortia, industry collaborative projects. And the areas of focus are going to be variable as well, ranging from the moonshot type stuff where, all right, let's figure the mRNA idea, right? Let's just cure cancer before it starts. And maybe that'll happen, maybe it won't, but something good's going to come out of it, like the internets did or something like that, all the way to the very applied, closer to market type things. Is that accurate to characterize things that way?
Yeah.
Almost like it's almost like an axis there where, yes, it's going to be around that, the whole thing. Is that accurate?
Yeah, exactly.
The part that I'm still not sure is NIH is already looking at the big problems. They're trying to cure cancer. They're looking for solution for breast cancer. I'm not sure what is the role of ARPA H. That part is still not sure, because I think that NIH until now was also focused on a lot of the big problems that we really want to solve for humanity. So what will be ARPA H? In what sense it will be different?
Yeah, so one of the points, and I think you pointed this out earlier, is that much of what we support at NIH tends to focus on sort of fundamental knowledge-driven research. So not necessarily going into it with a particular use in mind, but rather let's try to figure out and solve this really interesting scientific problem. The approach it would take with with ARPA H is going in with a very specific end goal in mind to say what we want to do, and I'll just sort of make up an example I've used before, which is, we want to increase medication adherence by 5-fold over 3 years for hypertension medications, something that has lots of downstream consequences, et cetera. But it's something like that, sort of with that level of like specificity, but just picture it as a much more dynamic and higher risk, high reward type of effort. The other distinction I would say is the approach to supporting that research. So again, not so much, NIH does a lot of different types of mechanisms, but the bread and butter of what we do at NIH really comes back to our research grants, mostly R01s and other kind of research project grants. And that's great, but they serve a really important focus and role in the biomedical research ecosystem. Obviously, we've made tons of advancements over the years. What we're talking about for ARPA H is something that is a much more managed program where there's a lot of sort of directive interaction between the performers and the program managers to help kind of accomplish those very specific goals. And, things where, if something is not working, they'll pull the plug on it. If something is, not exactly turning out how they like, but they can make a determination to really focus in on 1 or 2 key areas, they can, change how they are distributing the resources, or maybe even request additional resources to be pulled into that, and or reformulate teams. You don't have to come in with the team that comes in with the application. So that gives a lot of flexibility in terms of how we fund. And NIH has done this on a very, very small scale with a handful of projects. I know Heath is very familiar with one that is obviously very relevant to the time we're living in with COVID. But we're talking about doing this very broadly.
So I mean, I appreciate that. I think it gets a little bit to what Mitch was asking about the program manager role in selecting projects and how program managers be selected and providing inputs. I think that would be a question that obviously anybody would be curious about, but I think it's important for you to note having that flexibility to not of having the program managers within ARPA H to be able to actively contribute to the success of and not be hidebound to a R01 grant sequence just because that's what it is. That actually is very different. It provides a lot of flexibility based on my personal experience. And so that's encouraging to hear from my perspective. But Mitch did mention as program managers, if it's like DARPA, will have a significant role. And I think you alluded to this, Tara. There's a question from Mitch about how will program managers be selected? Will there be opportunities to make recommendations? I'll carry a step further from things I've heard is there a desire to have, say, industry, participation on a rolling basis in some way? I'm just throwing out ideas, but that was a question from Mitch.
Yeah. In terms of the program managers, absolutely will play an essential role in the selection and the development of the programs specifically, but also in the selection of the projects that are funded and the management of those, as we've talked about different examples of how they could, kind of make modifications as things go along. In terms of how they'll be selected, of course, when we're starting pretty much from scratch, so we're going to want to have as far of a reach as possible in trying to recruit program managers. So, we'll have kind of an open process. I will say one of the things that I think is going to be really, really important to consider for, as we're thinking through program managers, once we get to that point to be able to hire them, is we expect them to come forward with an idea, right? And make that part of the interview process. And part of that reason is to just understand, whether or not they're operating in the same mindset of this, like really bold, ambitious, going to take a lot of risk, but obviously being responsible with taxpayer dollars, but that's a very different approach sometimes than I think what is sometimes typically looked for when in the hiring process. So that's one thing I'll just note there. There's something else that you said that maybe
opportunities to make recommendations, like from industry and whatnot, or maybe a rolling basis appointment, things like that.
In terms of recommendations, how DARPA does it with their program managers. I mean, they just have like an email address or submission site on their website to have interested people submit CVs. So one could envision something similar to that. The other thing I would add is going back to that authorities issue we talked about at the beginning. The authorities here are going to be really, really important. And the reason I'm emphasizing that is because it gives us it determines the amount of flexibility that we have in hiring and how much compensation we can offer, which we know is going to be a challenge. We're still going to be within the federal system. We're not going to be able to pay, maybe as well as, in the private sector, but our hope is that we can make a really compelling case for why it would be really amazing to come work for ARPA H, and we could hire people quickly. They would be in term limited positions, and they would be, at least fairly well compensated with higher compensation rates than we currently have right now.
So go ahead.
Just as so you're looking for the kinds of people that would be coming out of their position, work for some number of years at ARPA H, and potentially go back to a similar position in industry or academia?
Yeah, so the DARPA model for this, they have people and they come and the program managers are there for anywhere from 2 to 4 years. And they have about 25% turnover every single year in their program managers. I think we're taking kind of a similar-ish approach. We're thinking, sort of in the 3 to 5 or 6 year kind of range for the term limits for these people, and then expect that we would have maybe a slightly less turnover, but still, you're thinking like 15-20% turnover every year in your program managers.
Got it.
Cool.
I'm just wondering, will there be any type of set of guidelines or legislation? I mean, maybe legislation is too strong a word, for those individuals to be sure that their job will still be there when they need to go back. Do in other words, one of the big concerns, of course, is that you have people who are very well qualified, but might be reluctant to leave really nice jobs to do this for 4 years if they're uncertain that their current position will, be there.
Yeah. So one thing I'll note that always is going to be a challenge to some extent for DARPA and ARPA E and the other ARPAs across the federal government, is that the government ethics rules do apply. So certain conflicts of interest discussions need to happen in order to have some of those sort of safeguards put in place. But there are different mechanisms to be able to utilize to help facilitate that transition. And one that I know DARPA uses a decent amount, particularly for their office directors, is something that's called an IPA. It's like an intergovernmental, actually, I forget what it actually stands for, but personnel, some sort of personnel agreement, basically. And what that means is you could negotiate so that they hold the position within their company, but the federal government covers the cost of the salary. And then, of course, then you have to put in place a ton of safeguards to be able to say, like, well, if applications from that company come in, they can't have any say in the funding of those. And so there are pros and cons to that approach, but it is one approach that we could take.
Yeah, I know that NSF uses those mechanisms quite often. And yeah, people can roll in from, while technically a grant is going to company or academic institution, and but then they're firewalled, and then for a period of year, at least a year after, they're firewalled too. So
Right.
as you say, there's pros and cons on both
There are
sides.
definitely pros and cons.
Yep.
And how DARPA looks at this is, their people come in and some of them go back to their positions and some of them go back and they totally change their career trajectory, or go back and work in industry again, in maybe in a different capacity. And then DARPA has this interesting sort of magnetic effect where people then come back sometimes as from being a program manager, spend a bit more time out in industry, then come back and be an office director or in some other such position.
Thanks.
All right, good questions coming out so far. I mean, I have some canned ones still, but anybody from do we have any representatives from sort of larger company or industry groups here? I mean, we've heard a little bit from the small business side so far. From a larger industry perspective, thinking about how the interface with a program of the magnitude of like ARPA H might be, are there any thoughts, concerns, just, things that you might want to share with Tara at this point from anybody on the call?
It's Christian. Not sure if you look at me, Heath.
I didn't even look at you. I was looking at Mitch right then, but it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah, no, I think I had two questions. One is we just went very successfully through the RADx program through NIPIB, helped bring rapid antigen test much quicker to the market than we could have ever done.
Mm-hmm.
Will RADx maintain or will be maintained within NIPIB, or is this something that you could see move into an ARPA H setting?
Yeah, I think RADx will stay where it is. Obviously, it's going to eventually kind of wind down on some level, but I know Bruce has kind of a vision for how that will operate into the future and post-pandemic even. But I will say, and especially because I'm involved in that effort as well. We've learned a lot through the course of having that be developed, and in particular interactions with and the benefits of very close collaboration with FDA. And part of it is just a very simple thing of just having close communication early and often with them. That's one element of it that I think is important and is somewhat simple, although easier said than done. But I will say one of the things that we've discussed, and actually it was included in the Cures 2.0 language, is some very specific authorizing language that says, how ARPA H and FDA could and should collaborate and work together to help expedite some of the review of things, and actually how ARPA H, and this is very in the weeds on the sort of workings of the federal government side, but how ARPA H could provide FDA some resources to compensate them for the work that they would be doing that would be above and beyond for ARPA H. And this would, I think, really help to advance a lot of the efforts in that space.
So you actually partially answered my second question without me even asking them. So thank you. It was, if you could envision, so for example, we do a lot of academic industrial partnership grants right now. That's one of the growing areas. And you've heard from Dr. Schnell and Dr. Woodard. We work with the folks in imaging mainly. But could you envision projects where there is a game plan to work on something we wouldn't do without this program that maybe involves the FDA and bringing it in an accelerated fashion to the market? So something that would be, I think, of tremendous interest. That would be then an academic industrial partnership grant on steroids, I would say, if we could really accelerate that last step.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the spaces that we want to live in with ARPA H.
That's interesting. Okay. Any other questions, comments from the group, so to speak?
And I'm interested to hear from, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I'm interested to hear from you all too about any sort of concerns you have about ARPA H, and or some comments and feedback on previous interactions with these sort of public-private partnerships or working with the federal government, and where you kind of saw barriers in the process so that we can be proactively thinking about them and addressing them.
I do have a question. This is Pamela Woodard, and I do work a lot with Christian Usman. I'm at Washington University, but we do have a fair number of academic industry partnerships at WashU. One of the questions I've had some minimal interaction with DARPA, and I was wondering if, what you envision the application process would be for funding at ARPA H. With DARPA, and, it possibly was that I was new to this, it sort of felt like I had this project and I was supposed to email a bunch of different people and pitch it to them and see if they liked it. And, so it was kind of this haphazard. It wasn't, I mean, the NIH way, of course, is much more formal, but is there something where it's not like, I have this idea and I just hope I land on the right person or the right group of people to get my voice heard with the application that I have?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I think the process that we're envisioning for ARPA H at the moment, and again, it will be dependent on a few things, but the process we're envisioning currently is that there would be, a broad call, a broad agency announcement that would go out and say, we have this idea. We want to have people submit really great ideas to solve this problem that we're trying to address. And, these people would submit, applications coming in. One of the earlier steps that we are considering and likely might implement across the board, but for sure, at least for some of the efforts, is a sort of quick review abstract process at the beginning, so people can just write up a page or two and say, like, this is my idea. What what do you think? And they would get, they would get feedback on that, and that would give an indication on whether or not it's actually, appropriate for what that call for ideas was, or maybe it's something that could be modified, etc. But it'd give you an indication pretty quickly, and we want a really quick turnaround on those. And then, move forward with submitting a full-fledged application that would then be reviewed through an internal review process and decisions made. And I'll tell you, DARPA has told me that their process is from, agreement to and selection of the people, the performers, and the awards that they want to fund. They can get the money out the door on an average within it's 42 days or something. I think at ARPA H, we take that as a challenge to say, we want to set this up so we can do it faster. So that's one of the things that I will say, that we're trying to really streamline the processes and provide sort of two-way feedback early.
And Tara, is it correct to say that the idea of using mechanisms like the BAA allow that flexibility to sort of rapidly select and deploy? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the funding mechanisms such as other transaction to also help facilitate that. Yeah.
Yep.
Thanks.
All right. Well, I'm going to be quiet because Tara actually asked all of y'all a question or two and opened the door. So who has some feedback or who has some concerns that y'all want to share with Tara? All right, now we got.
I have a question. This is Etta Pisano from the American College of Radiology. I'm concerned about how the ideas are going to be generated and about how conflicts of interest will be managed. It just worries me that they'll be like favored sons or something. I just want to hear more about that.
Yeah. One thing I don't think I got into when I was talking about it broadly in sort of my opening comments, which I think it just neglected to mention, is that equity is going to be a really important piece of that, of ARPA H. It's going to be a key element in everything that it does. So I view that through three lenses, and this is why I'm bringing it up. But it's the people we hire, the programs we support, and the performers that receive the awards. And so that to some extent will help to hopefully mitigate a little bit against that, because I think, one of the things that we do worry about a little bit is having the quote unquote old boys clubs, right, where it's like the same old people receive all the funding. And we know that that there's a lot of great ideas out there, and we want to make sure that we're hitting a wide swath of those. And then, of course, on the more kind of like legal aspects of that kind of conflict of interest thing, there will obviously be lots of safeguards in place and ethics reviews, hopefully done in a timely and streamlined fashion to help mitigate against some of that. And at the end of the day, the ARPA H director is going to have to sign off on it. So if they see anything, they can flag it there.
It's Christian, maybe to give some more feedback to your question. I saw in the concept paper that was released in the beginning that health equity and access to care is an important topic. I frequently struggle that the health economics and the value piece is missing in a lot of these studies that are currently funded. And when we do projects in regards to access to care, who funds it? Where does the money come from? Who will pay then the physician to do a screening model or whatever it might be? These are things we hit a wall. NIH is not really set up, or NIBIB at least is not set up to fund these types of projects. Could you envision, with the focus on health equity, that there is consideration of the value topic of tests and so on?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a space that ARPA H could venture into much more readily than NIH is able to, and it's a little kind of more outside the mission of NIH in many ways.
Can I have a follow-up to I'm sorry, my dog is barking. I have a follow-up question to my question, which was, you talked about conflict of interest. What about political pressure? Is there going to be some safeguards? So, like, for example, I'll just make up a project. ARPA H wants a combined health, a system, EHR that translates from one EHR to another, so we can create registries that actually span hospital systems, and without having to use and make our own data dictionary the first time we do it, just as an example. Like, that will really make some big companies mad if ARPA H did something like that. So is there going to be somebody who's got some political power that will push back on, for the good of society? I mean, how's this going to work?
Yeah, I mean, that's the space that ARPA H wants to live in. It's this disruptive innovation, kind of area. And, sort of politically, what the current legislation states is that the ARPA H director would be a presidential appointee. So much like the NCI director is currently a presidential appointee. So, in some sense, because they will have control over their own budget, they will have, that kind of direct appointment mechanism. That does give a lot of leeway there. The other thing that is sort of the political reality, where I thought you might go with this question, and maybe it's kind of a follow-up question that you might have, is, how can we mitigate against sort of line items in the budget saying, 20% of the ARPA H budget must focus on cancer and 10% must focus on this and that. And that's something that I think we're going to have to continually, push back against. It is something that NIH often deals with and tries to do the same, but I think DARPA has done a really good job at being able to push back on that, and not just those line item things, but also just the size of their budget, because they feel very strongly that this model can only scale so far. And we have to figure out what that right level is for the biomedical and health ecosystem. I don't know if it's going to be the same as with national security, but I just wanted to mention that as well.
So I'll throw out something that in what you just said, Tara, in the previous question that just sort of occurred to me. Is there any thought been given so far, and what are the, well, it's two parts. One is, I'm sure there has been, but what is sort of the thought process for, let's say, over a 3-year cycle or 5-year cycle? Obviously things will evolve, right? I mean, and so as we've just seen the last 2 years, like, well, that completely changed, whatever it is. So in selection of focus areas, is it going to be, are you planning on doing like sort of have it be largely internally generated? Are you looking for sort of active inputs from, say, industry and others on like transform topics? Are you going to sort of rely on these submitted, concept papers and do the internal review and say, these are some crazy cool ideas? And I mean, all of those are valid, but I was just wondering what, one, the thought process was so far on that. And two, since this is about industry, so how do you sort of envision sort of on a more sustained regular basis, some kind of, and obviously all TBD with authorities and whatnot, but, public-private partnerships and subcapacity between ARPA H and industry groups, not necessarily financial, but just partnerships, right? And what thinking has been happening so far on that?
Yeah. So to the first question, one of the things that we really want to try to do with ARPA H is set this up in a way where, we're getting really broad input. And, even as a program manager is developing a program, like they may come in, right, as mentioned, as part of the interview process and, have an idea. And, it's not a fully fleshed out idea, right? So they're going to need to have conversations with experts in the area and iterate and help, kind of think through, gather information, do a bunch of research, think through how this program could and should be set up and what is, realistic. And I think that will also help to inform the milestones that will be built into these programs as well. So, I mean, the short answer to your first question is all of the above, because that's one way. The other way is, an ARPA H director is going to come in, they're going to have a vision for where they want the organization to go and to focus, and have preferences there. And so they'll have some say. And with that leadership change happening every, 3, 4, 5 years, right, you're constantly going to be evolving and reassessing where you want to go and where the priorities will lay. And then this is bad because I guess it's at the end of the day. Now I've already forgot yours. Oh, how to work in public-private partnerships.
Any ideas on public-private partnerships?
Yeah, public-private
or
partnerships
industry?
with industry. No, I think that's going to be really critical because what we know is that we're not going to be in the space of like, manufacturing products, right? And so what we'll want to do is be able to work with folks in industry to either get things to the point where they can, kind of be ready to go, or help facilitate, as I mentioned before, breaking down some barriers that that are typically faced along the way. So whether that is helping to speed things through and working with FDA for clearance, or it could be something like, hey, we're gonna work with the VA. They have a big healthcare system within the federal government. How can we work with VA or HRSA with their federally qualified health centers to say, like, if something is developed and it meets specifications X, Y, and Z, like you've got to guarantee, like they'll guarantee to buy, I don't know, 10 million of, of whatever product that might be coming out. So that's one, kind of example. And of course, we'll have to work through these as they come up and And I think at the beginning, for sure, on a case-by-case basis, but we've been having some of these interagency conversations, and there's interest.
Awesome. Awesome. So there's one more question in the chat, and then we're coming up on time. First of all, thank you very much, Tara, for all your inputs and insights. Michael, and Michael, I may ask you to unmute to make sure I understand which area you're coming from, but he asked, how will IP issues be handled? Michael, my question for you is, are you talking about it from a startup perspective or from an industry donating in perspective? Which side of IP?
Yeah, who owns the IP that's generated?
Yeah, so the general approach that's taken by most organizations, I know DARPA handles things this way, is that the federal government would not hold the patent. They might make some agreements to have, a right to license the whatever the product is, but that I think obviously we'd have our attorneys continue to work on, because they're still working through some of the specifics. It gets very, very complicated, but that's sort of the general approach that I think we would take.
Great. Thanks, Tara. So I'm hesitant to open it up for another question because I know we're right up on time. Tara, do you have anything you want to ask for input on? Any last words for the group?
No, I mean, I think, I've asked the question, I think, and unless others have any additional feedback that they want to focus on in particular, the sort of the barriers to working with the federal government. I mean, that to me is a space that I feel like at this moment in time, as we're setting up a new organization, we have more flexibility to be able to address those from the start, and just want to make sure we understand the full scope of everything.
Any last comments on that front from the group?
Maybe I have one more comment. Within the NIH, I think I see very mixed appetite in regards to academic industrial partnership grants. Some program officers love them, others are not the biggest fans. I think that is something where it would be great if everybody would treat them in a similar fashion. Overall, we cannot complain. It works well, our collaboration with the NIH, but it's very interesting when you get feedback from some folks, how different opinions are about the value of industry within it. And I think that applies to large companies as well as a lot of small companies that the Science Center really helps foster.
Great. Thanks, Christian. I promised that we would try and end this thing on time. And I know if we open the can of worms at 4:55, that will not work out well. So I want to thank everybody who is here on the panel for participating. If you have other thoughts or feedback, feel free to drop us an email. We'll be glad to forward that on to Tara at some point. If you just want to, hey, and another thing, as you think about it after this discussion, please do feel free to forward that on to us at the Science Center. We'll pass that along. And then Tara, I want to say thank you very much to you for making the time and being so open with where things are at. That's not normal, especially as things are getting started, based on my experience anyway. So definitely appreciate the willingness to do so. With that, I will turn it over to Angela to close us out.